Welcome, and we are grateful for your presence at Grow Night this evening. Thank you to everyone for being here and for being with us. We will be doing our pastoral care training to explore what it means to listen, to be present, to gather with folks, to be present with folks. This is a reminder that pastoral care is the work of the entire body of faith. It is not just the work of the pastor. And so a few years ago, we began a pastoral care team to engage in this work, to do this work in community. And so I'm grateful that the chairs of our pastoral care team, Desiree and Katrina and Beth, have been doing this work in community. And I'm grateful that Joel Walker is with us. And that he will be inviting us to think about this part of being present that is often really challenging around prayer. How do we pray for people? How do we engage in prayer? How do we work through that together? And so I want to invite you just to pause in a moment of centering. And why don't we just place our hands over our chest for a moment and just check in with our breathing and our pulse. And to take a deep breath in and exhale. Loving God, for your presence, we are grateful for your invitation into the world that is uneasy and uncertain, that is full of possibility and seeds waiting to sprout. We give thanks. May we be present in love. May it be so. Amen. Well, as we begin this work, I want to share a little bit about pastoral care. First, pastoral care might be something that you're already doing. It might be something where you already show up for folks, where you're the person that people already call. And so this training isn't just useful for the work of listening to folks in the Abbey. It's intentional that we would all be open to listening to people, avidly listening to people, getting better at listening to people. And so that when someone says that they need us, or when they say that without words, we can hear them. That there's this phrase where people might ask, pray for me. And there's a theologian who talks about pray for me as this way of someone signaling their needs, someone signaling that there is a brokenness, a loss, a space of grief, a bucket that is heavy. And so he uses this metaphor, Keith Carter, of a bucket that's heavy. And when someone says, pray for me, it's like we're holding a little bit of that water that is weighing them down in their bucket. We're making space in our lives. We're making space in our bucket to walk alongside them and to care alongside them. And so we began the pastoral care team with this work of being present with folks. It might be in hospital rooms. It might be in after worship services. It might be a call in a moment of crisis, and it might be ongoing support over coffee. It might be being in tune and listening whenever needed. And so we invite you to be a part of that. And I want to invite Desiree to share a little bit more specifically about the active ministry of presence that pastoral care team leaders have at the Abbey.
Hello, I'm Desiree, and the activities that we participate in, the very first one is what you're doing right now, is the training. And we also invite you to attend 2 meetings per year to offer support to one another and to sharpen our skills in the pastoral care realm. And we also offer pastoral care to the Urban Abbey community after one service each month. And you can do more than that if you want to. And we just would really appreciate those who would be able to do it at least once a month. And when we do pastoral care, there's certain things that we work on, and we work on these things together. It's part of when we meet twice a year in our personal development. We practice these things together, and we talk about if we're struggling and how we can get better and that sort of thing. But the first thing is to be a non-anxious presence, somebody who is, in a place of seeing others from the eyes of love, and being able to take deep breaths if you need to, ask the other person to take deep breaths if they need to help calm the situation down. And then listening with compassion. That's probably one of the most important things that we do, is listen. And Katrina will talk a little bit more about listening, but that's one of the most important things that we do. Oftentimes people really just need to be heard. They don't need somebody to tell them what they can do to solve their problems and that sort of thing. It really is about listening and hearing them and just being with them as you're listening to them. Praying with folks as appropriate. And typically when I'm working with somebody, or I'm talking with somebody and listening with somebody, I will ask them if they are interested in having me say a prayer with them. And then I will also ask them if they would like to hold hands while we do the prayer. And it's completely up to the person if they would prefer that I say it out loud, or if I say it to myself, if we sit silently, whatever is the most appropriate thing for that person and their comfort level. We also collect the prayer requests before we leave, and we will read through them and say prayers for those folks or those situations that are on the prayer request. Deborah will let us know if somebody is in the hospital, if they're homesick and need visitors and that sort of thing. So we will visit convalescing Urban Abbey community members wherever they may need us. And when we do that, it's typically, we go in, we'll meet with them for maybe 15 minutes, just to check in to see how they're doing, to let them know that the Abbey is there to support them and praying for them. And then one of the other most important parts is to keep everything confidential. We want those folks who come to share with us to feel safe and to feel that they can be heard without fear that we're going to go tell somebody else what they shared with us. So those are the activities of the pastoral care. And then I will pass it on to Katrina at this point.
So we want to do listening next or boundaries?
Whichever.
Okay, well, I'm happy to go ahead and do that as soon as I get my computer screen back up.
Well, I can go ahead and talk about boundaries if you'd like.
Sure.
So obviously that's an important piece of doing pastoral care. As Desiree just mentioned, the keeping things confidential, with the exception of sharing concerns with other pastoral care staff in order to pray about them when it's appropriate, but it's not meant in an attempt to pass information along, other than to just be holding people in our thoughts and prayers, and in holding everyone close to each other. Being aware of the limitations of our training, and what our role is. We are not professionals. This isn't something we do. Like, I certainly don't get paid to do this, and so we would be passing, if there's another, if people do need professional help, that we would be providing resources if such were the case, but not to try to be a counselor or someone who is a professional. We try to stay away from using words like sweetie and honey. Those are not words that would necessarily be very helpful, especially if people are in crisis. And a lot of times people feel a need to kind of talk about themselves, and this is not the time to do that. This would be an opportunity for people to simply listen and not feel compelled to share about, oh, well, when that I had that happen, or I know someone who had that happen. Those are not helpful times. And then just use your touch sparingly. It can be a powerful tool. It can be healing and it can be comforting, but it can also be confusing and unwelcome. So it's really important that use it only when it's going to serve a good purpose, and it meets the person's needs, not your own. Uh, and I would certainly recommend that you ask for permission first before you go ahead and um, touch someone. And you could easily say, would you like to hold hands for prayer? Or would you like a hug? Of course, right now, neither of those are welcome. And so we would not be doing that at this time. Pre-COVID, that was an okay thing to do. And the other thing that I think is really important is not giving advice or trying to solve problems. People are not coming to you necessarily to have their problem solved. They simply just want someone to listen to them and to care about them. And so this is not a time to give people advice or tell them what they should be doing in that instance. So the next piece then would be listening, and Katrina will talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, listening is something we talk about a lot because it is hard. It's hard for a lot of us. It's hard to be silent. Certainly, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. It certainly is a challenge for me a lot of the time. So maybe it's even good that I'm talking about this. So we like to tell people to prepare mentally, clear your thoughts. As Desiree mentioned, be a non-anxious presence. So, anything that might be, I find it useful actually for myself. This is a time for me to not be preoccupied with my own stuff, and because I'm focused on someone else, it's also in a way helpful to me. So that for me, that's part of being a non-anxious presence. And don't try to think of answers ahead of time, because I think what ends up happening there is that you end up repeating cliches or saying, these kind of platitudes that everybody has heard. And so if you're really listening and in the moment, you'll respond, appropriately based on what they're sharing with you. Prepare physically. This is sometimes a challenge, and sometimes I've forgotten to do this, but it is helpful to be in a kind of a place that feels comfortable and secure. You sit facing the person, of course, make eye contact, make a conscious effort to make eye contact. It's okay to lean forward, being aware, obviously, of their boundaries and their physical space. If there are any materials that you might have, usually we don't, but if there's anything that you might have with you, have those ready to go. And then eliminate distractions like your cell phone. And I have to resist this temptation a lot. It'll be after the service, and the first thing I want to do is open my phone, because we're so conditioned to do that. But I need to sit there and look like I'm ready, like I'm not busy, that I'm ready to talk if someone would like to speak, and then I'm open to that. And it's a real temptation for me. So then prepare spiritually. I have done this occasionally. I think it's good when I've been able to do it and remember to do it, but a lot of times after the service, it can be kind of chaotic. But if you have a second to say a little prayer, or meditate on your pastoral care duties for that day, then I think that can be really helpful. And then when someone comes to speak with you, good listening rules can include, don't interrupt them. Listen a lot more than you speak. Be attentive, and listen to how they're saying things, and be aware of what they're saying, and maybe what they're not saying, what they're excluding intentionally. again, something that I think is difficult to do, but we've talked about it as part of the pastoral care team, is to allow for silence. Give people that space to think, to come up with the words. There are all kinds of there are different styles of communication and different kinds of learners and all kinds of different scenarios where someone may have different levels of comfort even. And so it may just take them time to formulate their thoughts. So give them that space to think. And that's really hard. That's really hard because we don't like silence in our world. And so, yeah, and the next bullet point for us is try to be understanding. Don't make assumptions about them. Obviously empathize with them. You can offer feedback, but that's not quite the same thing as advice. It might be simply at repeating what they're saying or paraphrasing what they said, because that shows them that you're listening. It also might help them process their ideas, and it'll help you kind of confirm that you understand what they're talking about. We're wrapping up here on the listening section, but again, reflect and wait. Help people consider how to live in chaos or wait until the right solution is seen clearly. And it's hard to sit with discomfort, but that is something that we often have to do. We have to allow ourselves to sit in a gray area. Do your best. Definitely don't issue judgment statements. I think we have a society where we often do make value-based statements a lot of the times, and we try to avoid making people feel judged. We don't want anyone to feel judged for any reason, and we can't be in their shoes, and we can't know what their reality is, and people won't come and speak to us if they feel like there's going to be any judgment about what they're saying. And our guide also says, when you feel like you don't have the words, it's okay to be honest. It's okay to say, thank you for sharing with me. I'm having a hard time finding words. There aren't words. I can't, I think it's okay to say, I can't know what it feels like, but I am thinking of you, or would you like to pray together, or however you want to phrase that. But the truth is we don't know what they're going through. We can't know what another person is going through exactly. So it is okay to say, that sounds very painful, but saying, I know what that's like, it's really painful, is not the same thing, because you may not know what it's like. And I'm sure that, Desiree will probably address some of that as well. So questions for you, when you're in the moment of listening, you can draw some things from people by saying, tell me more about that. How did that make you feel? Have you thought about, I've said, have you thought about how you want to deal with that? I have even had a few people coming. I know one person came to me who was in the middle of a divorce, and I just asked her, do you have an attorney, or do you have professional help getting through this process? Just to draw, and the conversation went on for a while, because she was sort of able to speak through all of her concerns and what she had done and what she hadn't done. And so again, I think the active listening is often just asking questions in a way that is respectful. And that's all I have on listening. I don't know if there's I'm comfortable if Beth or Desiree, if you want to add anything that occurred to you.
The only thing that I would add, and you have touched on it, Katrina, is that it's the silence. Silence can be very uncomfortable for people. It can be uncomfortable for the person who's doing the listening. And that period of time when you allow silence oftentimes gives that other person some time to kind of formulate what they want to say. And then that helps them to feel comfortable without having to be interrupted in the middle of trying to process what they do want to say. So I think you did a great job in sharing about listening. So thank you, Katrina.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some more difficult situations. And the first thing that I want to tell everybody is when you hear this, take a deep breath. We have very clear steps put in place. So and like Beth shared earlier, we are not the professionals. We do not have to resolve these issues for folks. We are there to listen. And if something becomes a little too serious, a little too much for our skill level, then we do need to reach out to Deborah, and then she can help us process through some of those things. So we're going to talk a little bit about assessing for suicide. The first thing that I want to talk about is just being aware of statements that might show intent to harm oneself. And they could be just even things like life doesn't feel worth living. Could be sometimes I just wish I wasn't here anymore. Things like that. So if you hear something like that, it's really okay to ask somebody if they have thought about suicide or if they have thought about hurting themselves. Oftentimes people think that if they bring it up, that's going to put ideas in somebody's head or push them over the edge. Those are myths. Typically when somebody is asked about if they are thinking about suicide, it kind of surprises them, and it also lets them know that you are really listening, that you are hearing them, and you're feeling them, and so that helps them to realize that somebody does care. So at that moment, if they do tell us that they are feeling suicidal or that they've had thoughts about suicide, you can ask things like, have you ever done that before? Have you hurt yourself before? Do you have a plan? And if you're not comfortable with that, that's okay. At that point, you can say something like, I think that it might be really helpful for us to go talk with Deborah at this point, and we can go see if Deborah's available. We do have a couple of other folks in the Abbey that might be helpful as well if Deborah is not available. So if you do end up becoming a pastoral care, we'll talk with you about those folks that we can reach out to. So we can provide resources for them. There's hotlines, there's local services, and again, Deborah's going to have all of that information. Nicole may also have that information. And then, of course, if we suspect that somebody's really going to be a danger to themselves or somebody else, then we definitely want to get Deborah involved, and we'll probably want to call 911 to report it. And what would be helpful is if whoever is making the call, that someone else is still sitting with that person to, just be a presence for them and be caring and non-judgmental, and just to let them know that, we want to help them stay safe, and we want to help them be able to receive the assistance that they need so that they can work on getting better. So one of the things just to keep in mind, that we're not therapists and we're not responsible for the choices that people make. It's very important that we seek care for ourselves. The Pastoral Care Team is very supportive of each other. So if we've had a difficult conversation with somebody, we have each other to talk to about that, about it. And I guess the one thing that I know that when we first started talking about difficult situations like this, it was a hard, difficult conversation for all of us, and how to actually move forward if we were in a situation like that. So we will continue to have conversations surrounding suicidal ideation and more difficult conversations with people and what to do. And so we just want you to know that there's a lot of support out there. Again, you're not a therapist. You are not responsible for the choices somebody makes. And we will all be there to help you with that situation. And I think at this point, it's going back to Deborah.
Thanks, Desiree. And I would add, in addition to some of the kind of, well, we're an urban ministry. We're in the heart of downtown, and we have a lot of kind of interesting, irregular moments, right? Like, we've had folks come in to worship and take all of the hygiene products and then tell Sierra she's going to call the police on her. So, like, just the Abbey, the life of the Abbey invites some things that we might not expect all the time. And the main work of the Abbey for everybody is just being present without being anxious. Because that won't serve, that won't make what's happening better. It won't like lower the temperature of the room. It won't help with that. The other thing that we have to remember is that there are needs that we cannot meet. We are a coffee shop, and so we have not hired social workers. And even if you are a social worker or a therapist and you happen to be on the pastoral care team, like, you're not technically working in that role during that time. And so there are some folks who have other connections that we can often deploy to get someone extra help, like when someone needs connection into a shelter, or when someone needs connection into MATCH, Metro Area Continuum of Care for the Homeless. One other kind of important boundary that I want to talk about here is that we don't give money to folks. We don't give money to folks. So if somebody asks for money, the answer is no. We will help folks get into connections with caseworkers, connections with some of the agencies around town. We also don't give people food unless it's really kind of an emergency, because we were doing that, and we turned into a bit of a day center, which, again, we've hired baristas, not social workers. And so if we were going to be a day center, we should really be a day center. And it was suboptimal. It was not helpful to our partners who actually do work to help folks into a different space, or into a way of living that is more stable, with a roof over their head. And so those are some boundaries that are hard and weird. And to be honest, they have been like the hardest learning for me, because I sort of created the day center situation by like, oh, sure, everybody have oatmeal. And then it was risky. So that's the other thing. If you ever feel unsafe, we will call the police. You should feel safe. Like, everything has a boundary, and we can't welcome people into a space that is unsafe. And so if someone's not in there, like, they're not well, they're not in a state of well-being, we may not have the tools to help them, but we will do what we can to get them to that space. And nobody should feel unsafe in that process. And so if someone is touching you and they shouldn't be, or if you see them doing that to someone else, then I need you to be sort of a gentle, non-anxious, like, hey, we need to probably call the police, Deborah. And we'll work on kind of flowing that through. This is just like the weirdness of ministry. It is also like, we're in downtown Omaha. We're not in West Omaha. And so it's part of, if you're choosing to be a part of the life of the Abbey, there's going to be moments that sort of are jarring, uncertain, invigorating, teaching. and remind us of who we're called to be. Those are rare. They're not like every day, or I hope they're not every day. If they are, we should really work on something. But I would like you to also, as we work on pastoral care, there's a few things that I'm really hoping that we never say to anyone, like, God has a plan, and this divorce or that thing, it might be God's plan. God only gives you what you can handle. It's a good thing you can handle so much. You'll be fine. Don't worry. What goes around comes around. Everything happens for a reason. God made this happen. Um, and anything like that. Maybe you can think of other cliches and statements. Jesus never says any of those things to anyone. And what he says is the peace I bring you is different from the peace the world brings. And so it's a ministry of presence, not platitudes. It's a ministry of showing up in spaces and hearing stories that are hard to listen to. Often we would like to use a platitude because it saves us from thinking of how vulnerable we are, right? Like, if God has a plan, that really hard thing that happened to someone else probably isn't going to happen to me. There must be a reason that it happened. And that's easy for us to fall into. It's easy for us to kind of say it out loud on accident. And so I just want to invite you, like, to be really intentional. I would prefer that we say nothing than to say something that could hurt someone. So many people come to me after being at churches that have hurt them in one way or another, and maybe the speech was intentional and maybe the speech was careless, but if we can't think of a word of care, then we should just be present in silence. So a little bit about how this will work at the end of worship, when we're all worshiping together in the same place. There'll be a space where you, I'll point to you and say, Beth is here to listen, to be present, to not offer a single cliche. And I'll point to Beth or to whoever is doing pastoral care after that service. And sometimes we might have two folks. And so what's really important is that you are available at the end of worship, and that we kind of station like in a good spot. My hope is that we're visible, because this is not counseling, it's not therapy, it's not somewhere off. I will say I have had people tell me all kinds of things in a coffee shop, and so it might seem surprising, but people can make space to share what they need to share with you. It's up to you to make that kind of space of welcome, to be ready, to be available. I know that everybody wants to kind of get into conversations at the close of worship, and you might have to tell some folks who come over and they just want to chat, hey, I'm doing this for the next 20 or 30 minutes, and I would love to chat with you later. You can also remind folks that this is a safe space when they are with you. I imagine you're there for about a half an hour. Sometimes it's good to let people know, that there's a time limit. If you feel like this is going on kind of a long time, it's okay to say, I've really appreciated our conversation, and I'm like, this time is gonna be coming to a close in like 10 minutes or something, if you can give them kind of a heads up in advance. And then as you close, you might ask them if they feel comfortable to pray with you, for you to pray with them. I would invite you to use their name, and to incorporate what you've heard. You might also ask them, is there something that you want me to pray with you about? And so just a simple prayer outline I have is, loving God, we know you are present with us in all times and all situations. This isn't like a guarantee of God's going to fix things. It isn't sort of magical. It's just saying God is present. We're present, God is present. Um, may this person experience the comfort of your presence. May they experience peace and hope. May they be filled with resilience. Um, and we pray this in your loving and holy name. Amen. Something very simple. You might even practice like 4 lines that you kind of have and feel really comfortable with, so that you can edit as the situation calls, or what you need to do. Then I want to invite Joel to share a little bit about his experience around prayer and how to pray for people.
Thanks, Deborah. Something that Katrina said, it really struck me, and it's the word preparation. And I really think that that is a key to having a successful prayer with a person in crisis. Preparing yourself that day, knowing that you're going to be on that day if called upon. So, when you're before worship, making sure you've got it on your calendar, and you remember as you're going to worship, I'm on today. And so that it isn't a last minute when Deborah says, and so you're on today, and you're like, oh geez, I forgot that. That's a setup for anxiety for yourself, probably. I mean, some people are really good at compartmentalizing, might be able to quick whip it into spiritual mode, but for most of us, it's just good to be ready, to be prepared. So be thinking about it. Hopefully you had a good night's sleep the night before, and you're those things that are happening in your own life, which we all have, you're able to kind of make peace with those for the time being, to be able to be with this person. But I also think prepare goes back further than that. I do think if you're going to be a regular part of the team, that the more you can get in touch with your own theology, the better your prayers will be. And practicing prayer with, just pretending that there's somebody with you, or maybe a family member. It's not a bad idea to just practice sometimes. But also the theology part's really important, because oftentimes if we don't really get in touch with what we believe about God, then we revert to kind of snippets of other pastors maybe we've heard, and we kind of weave together a prayer that might sound okay, but it's not really authentically from you. And I feel like many times the people you're with can feel that and perceive that. And I actually got called out one time in a Urban Abbey class. I prayed and pulled something that wasn't from me at all, that I had stolen from another pastor. And someone said, that felt a little inauthentic. And I thought, wow, and I said, you're absolutely right, because I wasn't really using my words. I was pulling from someone else, and you caught that, you saw that, you felt that. So, just getting in touch with your own theology. People that don't have really never thought critically about their theology, sometimes I equate it to, when you pray, then you're kind of praying like to whom it may concern. When you write letters sometimes, or when you're doing a cover letter and you're not really sure who it's going to, you write to whom it may concern. That's how I learned it. But if you don't really haven't thought a lot about who is this entity that you call God, then it can be a little awkward, and it can come off that way. So be prepared that day, but also, again, your own theology, I think, will help. Having said that, I like what Deborah said about the language she used. It's hard to know, especially if this is a new person to the Abbey, unless they reveal a lot about their own religious background or theology, using things that might be non-off-putting, or a little more soft, generic, whatever you want to call it, might be helpful the first time, especially if it's a new person. But I would also say that, if it's within your theological boundaries, to use maybe a different name for God that you keep hearing that person use as they're talking to you, I think that's okay. When I'm in the Deep South, they have different names for God that often are different than up here, or different denominations. And I'm pretty okay with many of them. There's probably some that I would not be comfortable using, but for the most part, if you're willing to meet them where they're at theologically themselves, as long as it's within the boundaries of what you're comfortable with. Not a whole lot else I would add, just the touch part, just the importance of offering, but certainly not compelling or insisting that there's a holding of hands. But for many people, they will take it, and it will be incredibly healing for them. If they're willing and they want that, that can oftentimes do more than your words, I believe. And then silence. The silence, I love what has already been said about silence when in the conversation, but also be at peace with silence in your prayer. Again, this is out of my own theology, but I believe the Spirit works through me to deliver this prayer. And I think I can get in my own way with the things that are going on in my own life, or trying to sound like the pastor that I admire as I'm praying. All these things that can get in my own way. But I feel like for me, the more I can let myself just be, and that may include pauses, long pauses in my prayer, I can let the Spirit work within me to deliver a message that that person needs to hear on that day. So those are the things I'm thinking of.
I would like to just add something, and it's actually something that I picked up when I was in a class of yours, Joel. I had a particularly difficult pastoral care moment, and I really felt like I had messed it up. And so I had gone to your prayer class that you had taught at the Urban Abbey one night, and one of the things that you said was, a lot of times people don't remember the exact words that you use, but they will remember that you were there and that you were present for them. And so I was able to kind of stop beating myself up for not having said in what I thought was the correct uh, words or the phrase, whatever. But I was able to, because I also then reflected back to a time that I needed pastoral care many years ago, and I don't recall a word that this woman used with me, but I still vividly remember how she was very, very, very caring and very present, and so that made me feel better. So I think that's an important thing to remember as well. It's easy to beat yourself up and think you didn't do it right, but at the end of the day, if you do show that you are present and you care and you've listened, I think that really makes a big difference.
Desiree or Katrina, do you have anything that that some of the other conversations have reminded you or sparked you that you want to share?
I do want to say, and you brought this up, Deborah, that I think it's really important to remember the person's name. And so sometimes that can be challenging when you feel, if you go into a situation and you're kind of anxious, if you can take some deep breaths and just say in your head that person's name a couple times and then use it. Thank you, Deborah, for coming and sitting with me. It really takes a lot of courage to talk when you have a situation. So Deborah, I really, really appreciate that you came, and I hope that I can be a good listener for you. And so if you say it a couple times, it helps you to remember it, so that when you get to the prayer, that that you remember that person's name and that you can use that person's name in the prayer.
Thanks, Desiree. I had one little thing that occurred to me while we were going through the list, and it was in the when you're maybe assessing and assisting someone who might be suicidal. If it gets to the point where you need to call 911, my general advice, and this is based on personal experience, is that if you're the person, or if someone else is the person that is on the phone to 911, make it clear that this is a person who might be having a mental health crisis, and ask to send a CIT officer, so crisis intervention trained officer. The police will send who's available, but if you make it very clear that this is a mental health crisis, the Omaha police are training more CIT officers, and it'll increase the odds that they'll actually send somebody that is more likely to de-escalate a situation with someone with a mental health problem. Because if someone isn't trained like anyone, if we don't know how to handle someone that might be in crisis, it's possible that they would escalate the crisis. So that's my only addition to that section.
I thought of one other thing that I might add too, I guess. I haven't actually done one of the after worship being with people that I can remember anyway. But in trying to envision that situation, I would think if it's somebody that maybe isn't necessarily in a significant crisis, but just has something to share, and maybe it's somebody that's come to the Abbey casually before, not forgetting to remind them, please continue to come, continue to allow this community to help you, that especially if they tend to be, maybe don't have a lot of support systems in their life. And if they've been coming quite a bit, I guess the next step down the road, if they haven't been involved in a small group at any point, and again, that their problems or what they're revealing to you is of a nature that, it doesn't take professionals to work with, thinking about the future of getting them involved in a small group, and or just telling them, about how that's helped you, at the end of the conversation could be helpful.
No, thanks, Joel. I think that's a really important space, especially I've seen where folks ideally are already in a small group, and then something very rough comes their way and they have a community that's already around them. I appreciate so much that we can have a team of people who are dedicated to pastoral care. Pastors are really fine with that first crisis, sort of like that first spark of something is happening. Maybe it's a death or a funeral, maybe it's like a particular crisis, but long-term support is sustainable if we have a community of folks, in a way that it's just not if it's only me. Or whomever. And so I appreciate that we can do this together, and that we can name that this ministry of presence, there will be sometimes, if you're serving on the pastoral care team, there might be several times when you are at the table ready to receive someone and nobody comes. But I would urge you to remember that your presence is important. Like, your presence reminds people that there is someone to talk to when they're ready. It reminds them that it's not like that it's everybody's work, that we share this together. It reminds them that it's not like some magical skill that a pastor has, because frankly, they don't. Like, pastoral care training in seminary is mostly like, you should remember your limits, and please don't pretend you're a therapist, because we're not trained to be therapists. And so I really appreciate that we can do this kind of communally and connected. There is one more thing that isn't on our list written down, but that I would really like to urge us to not ever say is, in terms of when we talk about suicide, is committed suicide as opposed to died by suicide. That there's just importance around language, around health and being and mental health. And so always putting a person first, always trying to be intentional, always trying to listen for, maybe asking, like, what are your pronouns? I don't want to misgender you. Being really clear that we're present for all kinds of folks. Like, those things might seem tiny, but they are important, and indicative of greater intention. And so I appreciate that we can have a team. I appreciate that this is work of intention, and that maybe we don't always get it exactly right. Like, John Wesley talks about, we're moving on to perfection, but like, it's going to be a while before we all get there. And so we don't, the work is about continuing to practice, continuing to be present, continuing to improve with how we show up for each other and how we listen. Any closing questions or thoughts or final things that you want to make sure are shared before we wrap this conversation up?
I had couple positive things that I wanted to say. I actually have talked to people in the pastoral care role who I didn't really know much before, and then afterwards I'm friends with them. I have this bond with them because maybe we've now shared this sort of, you know, intimate moment essentially, and they put their trust in me, and then maybe later in a more casual conversation I put my trust in them, and it developed into real, I can think of two people in particular where it developed into a real friendship with people at the Abbey because of that. And then the other thing I wanted to say is I've never had to call 911 because of a pastoral care experience. I've never had a, you know, really heavy or really scary situation. I mean, people have come to me to talk about big life events, but it's never been anything that's felt unmanageable. So we prepare for that, but I don't, like when I was talking about CIT officers, I don't want to scare someone. I think it's an outside chance that will happen. I just want people to feel like they know what to do if it does. So that's it.
Any other thoughts? Beth, Desiree, Joel? No? Okay. Well, I am grateful for your time, and I appreciate Katrina's kind of positive note, like we're not calling 911 every day or every week. And so we like we prepare for that. We are not just so that we can be present, right? Like that's part of practice. I would also add that the pastoral care team, if you decide to join it, um, there's a launch team that meets about 5 times a year when we're all meeting, that you can come and be a part of, to troubleshoot, to think strategically together, sometimes to make plans. In 2018, 19, I don't remember what year. Time is so strange right now. We hosted with Hanscom Park United Methodist Church, what is that? First aid, mental health first aid, and it was an all-day training, really solid training. We have partnered with NAMI in the past. We have an annual mental health awareness Sunday. The pastoral care team also reads books together, like books around grief, books around loss, books around mental health, and working on how we can engage with empathy and care into the world. And I think that just makes us all better humans in general. So we're grateful that you were here. Even if you don't want to join the pastoral care team, I think that all of these things, like don't say those cliches and listen really well, that will just make us all better humans. And unless there's, speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, we can say good night and goodbye. And if you're open to it, will you pray with me? Gracious and generous God, we give thanks for your presence, for your spirit that wells up within us, that nudges us to listen, that urges us to say a word of hope or care or challenge or compassion. We pray for your discernment. We pray for your call. We pray for your presence in the work that we engage in the world. We give thanks for everyone who has participated in this gathering today, and for everyone who will view it or see it or participate in it in the future. For the work that you offer us, we are grateful. May we have the courage. Amen.